Hey everybody, welcome to Obscurities in miniature, and it is time once more for a Friday Obscurity in Literature. And this book in front of me today is a bit of a personal grail. It's something that I have wanted, and I mean really wanted, my own copy of for a long time. And we're talking decades at this point, folks. Could I have probably picked up a secondhand one? Yeah, would I have gotten it for a reasonable price? Debatable. But I absolutely have coveted my own copy of Richard Corben's original Den. So I'm still not sure where I originally found out about this book. Not from the movie. Let me tell you that first of all. I actually, after having discovered the comic, eventually would go and watch the movie. And I mean, I was familiar with heavy metal, but I didn't really know much about what was in it at the time I first stumbled upon this stuff. And this is pre-internet, early 90s, I'd say, probably early to mid-teens. I maybe 12, 13, 14. I feel like probably about that age. Somewhere between 13 and 15. I think that's a safe bet. And so obviously with the subject matter and the things it was published in, was not the easiest to get a hold of for me at the time. Not only that, but then actually finding copies of this stuff was not the easiest at the time. While we did have some of the Fanagore Press stuff circulating, I feel like I got most of it online eventually years after. And Corben started going back to doing work for the bigger companies. But it was really difficult to get a hold of his stuff, and I feel like we wrote him or something, or wrote for like the Fanagore Kennel. I don't even remember anymore. I know I did a video a long time ago on his art book that we picked up. We found at the local bookstore next to like our family's go-to Mexican restaurant. It was just sitting there on the shelves, but I mean, that place always had funky, weird books, and for that I'm eternally grateful. But let's talk about this. Sadly, this was released posthumously. It would have been really cool to have seen Corben get to have it come out during his lifetime again. And for me, I was a fan. I've been a fan now for quite a few years. And it's interesting that having to actually have it in front of me now, how much of this I've kind of stumbled upon, through hunting old issues of heavy metal, or seeing stuff online, or in best of compilations from the magazine. There's a lot I've actually stumbled upon and was fairly familiar with, but, when this stuff was coming out, was probably pretty groundbreaking, if not just for the art, but for the influences and what they were doing with the book. So, first off the bat, this is part of, like, the new Richard Corben collection that Dark Horse has been putting out. It wasn't actually the first, surprisingly. Murky World was, but you can see similar format, similar colors, similar design, while Den is numbered, but this is not. I will eventually get around to talking about Murky World. As nice as it is, this is kind of like, almost like the beginning and the ending of Corben's career. This came much later than this book, obviously. And in case you're curious, it is a good size book. So here with a typical traditional floppy comic, which unfortunately I really wanted to get a copy of the History of the Marvel Universe in the big Treasury Edition version, but I've never come across it yet, and I'm pretty sure it exists. But, the artwork in it is totally made for something like that. Not that I am not familiar with, like, the majority of the History of the Marvel Universe by any stretch of the imagination, but for me the coolest part is all the background details, and I'm getting totally off task and track of what I was going to discuss here. But that's about par of the course. And it's my channel, so I don't care. Anyway, moving right along. The first thing that stands out to me, I've seen the cover art. I didn't remember the girl at the beginning being green, but I think that's more just a further stylistic choice. And underneath the gatefold, we have the untouched artwork. And I love some of those panoramic shots of Neverwhere that are included. Just the crazy, I don't know what Corben was doing, and I've had a lot of respect for the fact that not only was he a talented artist but the man was like the ultimate DIY work ethic. He quit his full-time job to focus on this stuff, even though, he wasn't exactly the most well-respected at the time, but he just rolled with it and kept doing it. And I mean, all these years later, it's quite an impressive body of work that he's published. And I mean, some of his stuff to me it's like he's got all the aesthetic of guys like Vallejo or however you want to pronounce it, Frazetta. That style of late 70s, early 80s fantasy art, of which he was perfectly capable of, making. We've got a nice introduction by Jose Villarrubia, one of the main people that really put the work into restoring this, and the colors in this book are just absolutely vibrant. And, what Corben was doing at the time was basically unheard of, and he's like doing his own color separations, and some of it's painted. I have a hard time figuring out which parts were painted and which were not. And it's interesting that even for as I don't want to say simplistic, but there's a less refined look to this early part. From my understanding, this was actually published in more of the underground comics at the time. But again, the sense of scale, the colors, the design of everything. And one of the things I've always appreciated about his artwork is he doesn't ever really limit himself to a specific style of panel. Some artists get kind of set in stone. He does a lot of interesting things with it. Again, some of it is a bit more cartoony. You can see its kind of roots in those underground stuff, but then we have like really nice looking panels like this. And again, just the sense of, time passing. And what really stood out to me, and I can't believe it never really dawned on me, but reading through this, and then even there's like an explicit reference to, the Chronicles of Barsoom and Burroughs' Martian books. The whole idea of this meek, mild-mannered person traveling to another dimension, much like John Carter did, 100 years earlier, is kind of wild and impressive in its own right. Now, some of this stuff obviously was in the movie, some of it isn't. You've got the whole Lochnar and all that. I feel like we saw something similar in like an older Morin magazine story. I could be wrong. So one of the things that really stood out to me, like I said, about the whole Martian aspect is the copious amounts of nudity. I've always liked this panel. It seems to show up all the time, but the detail, it seems like more of, maybe there was some photo referencing involved, and then this was put into the further panel. I don't know, but there's just a lot of fun stuff going on in here. And so, yeah, you have much like the actual story that they used for the Heavy Metal movie. You've got Den shows up in Neverwhere, tries to save the girl, gets himself involved in various rebellion schemes, fights all kinds of strange monsters, which you can tell Corben is having a lot of fun drawing. But the locales as well, I think, are quite fun and exciting, especially as we get later into things. And you can see a bit of like the storytelling component. This page right here especially feels like it was one of those, splash pages for the next syndicated is the right word, serialized episodes of the book. I don't know if he had everything kind of set in stone with where he was going with the story at the time. I'm turning pages fast, so hopefully I don't get nailed by YouTube censors, because like I said, there is copious. And that's kind of the other interesting thing, is with all of the just non-stop nudity in this book, it's never like a focal point, really. And I've always wondered, and I'm pretty sure these scenes right here are actually from the animated short that Corben made prior to actually drawing the story in this book. And then once you start getting into the ancient eldritch horrors that are coming, I always loved how just like the melty kind of lava lamp look of everything happening. Again, there's no denying just the design of these splash pages and then like the panels inside of that. They're quite eye-catching. As the great god comes and they summon him forth. And maybe you know the story and maybe you don't, and maybe I'm going to skip over it a bit. There's quite a few interesting things in the back. And then we do have a bit of a gallery of various Den-related artwork in the back, along with a bio on the man himself. This is the first of, gosh, I don't even know. I know there's at least 3. And then you have the Dens and Den Saga, and there's a couple other things that came later, and like I know there was the color comic that he drew. It wasn't painted or anything. I don't know. There's a lot, but I personally would love to see more. If you're a fan of this style of book, if you're not a bit squeamish about constant nude people from the 70s flailing around and fighting with everything in full view, there's some interesting shots in this book. Well, let me tell you that for sure. But it's just, I think, a major landmark in terms of sci-fi, fantasy, comic books, people doing their own thing. And, I mean, quite well-made artwork as well. And if that sounds like something interesting, then I wholeheartedly suggest you check it out. We'll have an Amazon link down below, and obviously you can check that out on your own free time. But I am eagerly looking forward to seeing what else Dark Horse has to offer with this series of books. And eventually we will get around to Murky World as well. So, with that said then, this has been High Lord Tamberlane with Obscurities and Miniatures, saying thanks for watching, and we will see you back here soon. Bye-bye!